Hi, it's Tucker. Today I'm covering honeymoons on cruise ships that will make you question if these two are really the best combo to celebrate. From a woman who unknowingly married a criminal on a secluded balcony, to a newlywed who tried to recreate the Titanic pose, only to meet the worst fate possible. It was September 25, 2017, aboard the cruise ship moving slowly off the coast of Barcelona. The Mediterranean stretched dark and calm beneath a clear sky. While most passengers had already settled in for the evening, Isabel Ashford was 28 years old and worked as a primary school teaching assistant outside Leeds. She had grown up in an orphanage after losing both parents as a child and spent most of her late teens working multiple jobs to eventually move out of assisted housing and build a stable life for herself. Friends described her as warm, quietly determined, and someone who had earned everything she had the hard way. She had recently married Sebastian Ashford, 31, heir to a family-owned property company in Manchester. The relationship had taken years to survive his mother Vivian's disapproval of Isabel's background. The honeymoon cruise had been Sebastian's idea, partly because Isabel had always dreamed of seeing the Mediterranean. Neither of them could swim particularly well. Isabel had admitted before boarding that open, dark water made her uncomfortable. That detail sits with me. She told him the water scared her before they even got on the ship, and he was the one who suggested the pose. By the time the couple wandered toward the quieter upper observation deck close to midnight, both had been drinking champagne since the welcome reception hours earlier. They were visibly intoxicated, laughing and struggling slightly with their balance as the ship moved beneath them. They decided to recreate the famous Titanic pose for a photo over the ocean. Isabel hesitated because of the dark water below, but Sebastian wrapped his arms around her waist and told her he would not let anything happen to her. She carefully climbed onto the narrow outer edge beside the railing and steadied herself against the top rail while leaning backward against his chest, holding her phone outward toward the ocean. Sebastian, drunk and confident, kept encouraging her to lean farther, so the photo would look more dramatic. Isabel gradually relaxed nearly her entire weight against him. Then someone farther down the deck called Sebastian's name. It was Vivian. I have to stop right there, because out of everything in this story, that is the detail that stays with me. His mother's voice was the last thing that happened before Isabel went over. She had spotted the couple near the railing and called out to him. Sebastian turned instinctively toward her voice without realizing Isabel had shifted almost all her balance onto him. The sudden movement caused Isabel's foot to slip sideways off the crossbar. She grabbed for the railing but could not find it in time. She fell backward over the side of the ship. She screamed before she disappeared into the darkness below. Sebastian lunged toward the railing, shouting her name, while crew members rushed onto the deck. The ship had continued moving forward, and nobody could immediately determine where she had entered the water. Floodlights were activated, and the ship reversed course while rescue teams searched large sections of the Mediterranean throughout the night. Isabel could not swim. The water was dark and cold. Investigators later concluded she most likely drowned within minutes of entering the water due to shock, disorientation, and exhaustion. Her body was recovered the following afternoon several miles from the ship's original position. The medical examiner recorded her cause of death as drowning following an accidental fall overboard. The photographs on her phone were recovered from the deck. The final picture they had been trying to take was never captured. Vivian's voice was the last thing Sebastian heard before his wife disappeared. That case that I found was an accident. The next one was not. And what makes it worse is that the woman at the center of it had no idea who she had actually married. It was August 16th, 2018, aboard the luxury cruise ship traveling through Caribbean waters during a private honeymoon voyage, attended primarily by wealthy guests traveling through invitation-based membership programs. Evelyn Carrington was 29 years old and worked as an art consultant from Boston, Massachusetts. She came from a wealthy New England family involved in finance and private philanthropy for multiple generations. She had recently married Daniel Laurent, who had presented himself throughout their 2-year relationship as an international property investor connected to European luxury real estate. He maintained the appearance of significant personal wealth through expensive gifts, luxury travel arrangements, high-end restaurants, and rented properties he introduced to Evelyn as family-owned estates. The couple had traveled extensively together, and Laurent had been welcomed into Evelyn's family circle without suspicion before the wedding took place in the summer of 2018. Daniel Vane was a career criminal connected to fraud, theft, and identity offenses across multiple states under different aliases. Vane had deliberately targeted Evelyn because her family background and social connections gave him access to elite circles and invitation-only travel events otherwise completely unavailable to him. When I read that, I had to go back and read it again. He didn't just deceive her, he chose her specifically because of who she was. That is a different level of calculation entirely. During the voyage, Vane used guest access privileges and stolen service credentials to move through restricted areas and enter luxury suites occupied by wealthy passengers. He stole jewelry, watches, cash, and room access cards from multiple guests throughout the ship, concealing everything inside luggage in the honeymoon suite he shared with Evelyn. On the fifth evening, Evelyn returned unexpectedly to the suite after leaving a personal item behind during a formal reception. She found open luggage filled with valuables later identified as stolen property belonging to other passengers. She also found unauthorized room access cards, cash bundles, and identification documents inconsistent with Vane's stated identity. This is the moment I keep coming back to when I think about this case. She went back for something she forgot. That one small decision changed everything. Vane returned to the suite moments later carrying additional stolen items. Evelyn confronted him. She threatened to contact ship security. Vane produced a handgun later found to have been brought onto the ship in separate pieces through a private boarding area for VIP guests before he secretly put it back together inside the cabin during the voyage. When Evelyn moved toward the suite door to leave, Vane fired once inside the cabin. Nearby guests reported hearing the shot immediately. Ship security initiated lockdown procedures across several lower decks, while medical personnel rushed to the suite. Vane attempted to flee through a restricted maintenance corridor near the lower docking area, while carrying stolen valuables and forged identification before being intercepted by security officers near a crew-only access point. Evelyn was transported to the ship's medical center, but did not survive. She was pronounced dead before the ship reached port the following morning. The medical examiner recorded her cause of death as a single gunshot wound causing fatal internal hemorrhage. Vane was detained aboard the vessel and transferred into federal custody on arrival. Investigation confirmed his identity fraud and linked him to multiple unsolved theft cases across the United States. Evelyn had no knowledge of who she had married. Evelyn never knew the truth about who she was with. The next case I want to include is different because one of them knew exactly what they were doing from the very beginning. It was the night of October 4th, 2019, aboard the luxury cruise ship pushing through rough Atlantic water several miles off the southern coast of Portugal. Cold wind swept across the upper decks while the ship moved through heavy swells in the darkness. Most passengers remained inside the warm dining rooms and lounges as the ocean grew increasingly turbulent. Theodore Ashcombe was 38 years old and worked as a property investor from Surrey, managing portions of his family's inherited estate land, rental properties, and investment holdings. Quiet, reserved, and financially comfortable from birth, Theodore had spent most of his adult life surrounded by lawyers and financial advisors. He avoided public attention despite the wealth attached to his name. By 2019, he had become deeply attached to his new wife, Claire Vale, and had spoken openly about wanting a quieter life after the honeymoon. Shortly before the wedding, he updated multiple legal and financial documents, including a life insurance policy naming Claire as sole beneficiary. His estate was valued at approximately £3 million. Claire had grown up in Bristol, in a financially unstable household, and spent her 20s working hospitality jobs in luxury hotels and private event venues. Friends described her as highly ambitious and focused on achieving financial security after years of debt and instability. She had carefully adapted herself to fit comfortably into wealthy social circles over several years. When she met Theodore in 2017, she presented herself as calm, attentive, and supportive of his quiet lifestyle. Their relationship moved quickly from introduction to engagement within 18 months. The honeymoon cruise had been organized almost entirely by Claire. She chose a quiet luxury ship popular with wealthy older travelers and booked one of the most expensive balcony suites. Theodore regularly carried prescription anti-anxiety medication during long trips because he struggled with insomnia and panic attacks while traveling. The medication was a sedative-class drug prescribed at a specific daily dosage. Claire knew exactly where he kept it because she helped organize his luggage and nightly routines throughout their relationship. On the fourth night, after several hours of drinking during a formal dinner reception, Theodore appeared noticeably more fatigued than usual. Witnesses later recalled Claire repeatedly bringing him drinks throughout the evening while encouraging him to relax and enjoy himself. She would disappear briefly, then return with fresh beverages. And I want you to think about what that looked like to everyone else in that dining room. An attentive wife bringing her husband drinks on their honeymoon. Nobody saw anything wrong. By the time the couple returned to their suite, his speech had become heavily slurred, and he struggled to stay on his feet before collapsing onto the bed, barely responsive. Claire waited approximately 90 minutes before contacting ship medical staff, claiming he had suddenly become unwell after drinking too much. Emergency responders rushed him to the ship's medical center. Rough weather prevented helicopter evacuation, and the ship continued toward the Portuguese coastline, while staff attempted to stabilize his breathing. Theodore suffered fatal respiratory failure before the ship reached port and was pronounced dead during the early morning hours. Claire maintained the appearance of a devastated widow throughout the initial investigation and cooperated fully with authorities, while estate matters moved forward quickly. She expressed appropriate shock and grief to fellow passengers and crew members. Toxicology reports later revealed sedative concentrations in Theodore's system, inconsistent with his prescribed dosage history. The levels suggested deliberate overdose rather than accidental overconsumption. Financial investigators uncovered unusual activity surrounding his insurance policies and estate arrangements in the months before the wedding. Ship surveillance footage and witness statements from bar staff contradicted portions of Claire's timeline, including accounts of her repeatedly collecting drinks alone from the bar shortly before Theodore's condition rapidly deteriorated. Investigators also noted inconsistencies in her explanation of the couple's movements and the timing of when Theodore became seriously unwell. Claire Vale was later arrested and charged with murder after returning to England. She maintained her innocence throughout proceedings, but evidence from toxicology, financial motive, and witness testimony proved substantial. She was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. Claire planned every detail of that trip. The next case had no planning involved at all, just a storm that moved faster than anyone predicted, and a ship that couldn't get out of the way in time. It was September 7th, 2017, aboard the Honeymoon cruise ship, traveling through the eastern Caribbean Sea. Tropical weather conditions had been worsening throughout the day during the height of hurricane season, and the ship had already begun diverting from its original route. Nathan Ashbourne was 32 years old and worked as a software engineer for a cybersecurity company in Atlanta, Georgia. He had spent nearly 2 years saving for the cruise after repeatedly postponing vacations because of work obligations and student loan debt. The couple had chosen the ship specifically for its extended route through St. Martin, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. The first several days passed well. They snorkeled, attended formal dinners, and joined outdoor deck activities organized for newlyweds, while the weather held calm. By the fourth day, tropical storm activity in the Atlantic intensified rapidly and shifted toward the ship's scheduled route. Updated forecasts forced the ship to cancel multiple island stops and redirect farther south. Wind conditions worsened overnight, producing violent rainfall and heavy swaying throughout passenger decks. Crew members secured outdoor furniture, closed the upper observation decks, and suspended most entertainment while many passengers stayed in their cabins. During the evening, the storm unexpectedly intensified into a major hurricane faster than earlier forecasts had projected, and I think about what that must have felt like. 2 years of saving, a honeymoon they had waited years for, and now they're stuck in their cabin listening to the ship creak while a hurricane builds outside. Large waves struck the side of the vessel repeatedly, forcing seawater through damaged exterior access doors and flooding several lower passenger corridors. Interior movement became extremely dangerous, as severe rolling caused furniture and unsecured equipment to shift violently throughout rooms and hallways. Nathan and Elena left their cabin after water began entering their corridor from damaged exterior access doors on decks below. They were moving toward a designated interior safety assembly area when the ship experienced a sudden severe roll caused by a large wave striking the starboard side. I've covered a lot of these cases, and this is the one where I genuinely cannot find a single decision anyone made that should have changed anything. They were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. The movement lasted only seconds, but threw multiple passengers hard against corridor walls and railings, while lighting briefly failed throughout sections of the vessel. Nathan was thrown against a metal support structure near a staircase landing during the roll. The impact caused catastrophic head trauma. Elena was knocked to the floor nearby but was not critically injured. Emergency medical teams reached them within minutes, despite continuing storm conditions and widespread damage across the ship. Nathan was transferred to the medical center unconscious. Hurricane-force winds and dangerous seas made helicopter evacuation impossible throughout the night. The ship reached calmer water nearly 12 hours later, after sustaining significant storm damage. By that point, Nathan had developed severe internal bleeding from the head injury sustained during the impact. He was pronounced dead shortly before emergency coastal medical teams boarded the vessel after it reached port in Puerto Rico. The medical examiner recorded his cause of death as fatal traumatic brain injury and internal hemorrhage resulting from blunt force head impact during sudden vessel movement caused by major wave contact. Investigators concluded the death resulted from injuries sustained during extreme hurricane conditions. The incident became part of a broader review into cruise ship storm routing procedures during the 2017 Atlantic hurricane season. Nathan's death came down to a wave and a few seconds. The next one came down to a decision made at 1 a.m. inside a casino and one wrong door. It was November 12, 2018, aboard the cruise ship moving through rough Caribbean water. Music, champagne, and formal wear filled the brightly lit dining decks deep into the evening. Elliot Pembroke was 33 years old and worked as a heating and ventilation technician. He had spent nearly 4 years saving for what he called the one perfect trip after marrying Naomi earlier that autumn. He grew up in a working-class household and spent most of his 20s taking extra shifts and weekend repair jobs to build stable savings. The couple had put off expensive vacations for years because of rent, bills, and wedding costs. When Elliot finally booked the luxury Caribbean honeymoon cruise, he treated it as the biggest achievement of his adult life. From the moment they boarded, he was overwhelmed by everything on board. He marveled at the size of the ship, the formal dining rooms, the endless bars and restaurants, and the dressed-up passengers everywhere he looked. The second formal night became one of the liveliest evenings of the voyage. Elliot and Naomi spent hours in the main dining hall drinking champagne with passengers they had met earlier in the day. They moved to a casino lounge where live music and gambling tables stayed crowded past midnight. Elliot rarely drank heavily at home, but the excitement of the honeymoon pushed him well past his usual limit throughout the night. He felt invincible and happy in a way he had never experienced before. Naomi matched his energy early in the evening but became increasingly concerned as his drinking escalated. Shortly after 1 a.m. tension developed, after he lost a significant amount of money at the tables. He had spent nearly $800 on blackjack and slot machines in less than 2 hours. Naomi urged him to stop and return to their cabin. Elliot insisted he could win it back and that she was being overly cautious. The argument escalated as he refused to leave the casino. Naomi finally told him she was returning to their room and expected him to follow soon. She walked toward the elevators alone, expecting him to follow within minutes. And I think about Naomi walking to that elevator alone, frustrated, expecting him to come knocking on the cabin door within the hour, not knowing that was the last time she would see him. He stayed behind drinking for another 30 minutes while playing higher stakes games. Around 1:30 a.m., Elliot finally decided to return to their cabin. Instead of waiting for the guest elevators, he pushed through a nearby crew access stairwell door, marked Employees Only, that passengers sometimes used as a shortcut between decks. The narrow metal stairwell connected multiple deck levels and was designed for crew movement during non-emergency situations. The ship had been moving through rough water for hours, and the interior corridors were swaying noticeably with each wave. As Elliot descended the narrow metal stairs between Deck 9 and Deck 6, the ship rolled unexpectedly from a larger swell. He lost his footing on the metal step and fell forward down multiple flights. His body struck the metal railings and steps repeatedly as he tumbled downward. His head impacted the railings multiple times, causing severe head trauma. He landed motionless on the lower landing near Deck 6 with blood pooling around his head. The stairwell stayed empty for nearly 40 minutes before a housekeeping steward doing early morning rounds found him unconscious beside the service corridor. Medical staff rushed him to the ship's treatment center with catastrophic head and spinal injuries. Despite prolonged resuscitation efforts and aggressive emergency treatment, he never regained consciousness. Doctors worked through the night attempting to stabilize his condition, but the damage was too severe. Elliot Pembroke was pronounced dead before sunrise. The medical examiner recorded his cause of death as fatal traumatic brain injury and cervical spine damage from a multi-flight staircase fall with acute alcohol intoxication, identified as a primary contributing factor. The ship's investigation concluded that Elliot had used the restricted crew stairwell against posted warnings, and that his level of alcohol consumption had severely impaired his judgment and balance. Naomi spent the remaining days of the voyage in interviews with ship security and local authorities, still wearing the honeymoon pin on her formal jacket from the night Elliot died. She returned to shore alone as a widow. Elliot made a series of choices that night that each made the next one worse. The last case I'm covering today involves no choices at all, just a man who refused to admit something was wrong until his body made the decision for him. It was September 21st, 2016, aboard the Honeymoon cruise ship traveling through the Mediterranean between Italy and Greece. Newlywed passengers filled the dining halls and entertainment decks while rough weather developed across the sea overnight. Louis Beaumont was 35 years old and worked as a corporate attorney from Chicago, Illinois. He came from a wealthy family involved in private investment banking and international hospitality ventures across the Midwest. Friends described him as someone who controlled every detail of his professional and personal life, with the same precision he applied to legal work. The honeymoon voyage had been planned for nearly a year and included private excursions, upgraded accommodations, and formal dining reservations, all arranged personally by Louis. He had also organized a series of Mediterranean shore excursions timed around the ship's schedule. The first several days passed without incident, and the couple moved through the itinerary exactly as planned. By the middle of the voyage, Louis had begun experiencing recurring abdominal pain. He put it down to food, alcohol, fatigue, and travel stress. Amelia urged him repeatedly to visit the ship's medical center. He declined each time and continued attending scheduled events and shore excursions, while the pain reportedly worsened day by day. And this is the part that still baffles me in this case. She asked him to see a doctor more than once. He had a medical center on the same ship. He just kept saying no. On the sixth evening, the couple attended a formal dinner reception inside one of the ship's main dining halls. Louis appeared visibly pale and fatigued throughout the meal. He dismissed every concerned comment and told Amelia the pain was probably just bad seafood. After dinner, they walked back toward their suite through an interior corridor. Louis collapsed shortly afterward from severe abdominal pain. Ship medical staff responded immediately and transferred him to the onboard infirmary. Their assessment concluded he had a ruptured appendix with severe abdominal infection. Emergency evacuation was initiated, but worsening sea conditions and strong overnight winds delayed helicopter transfer for several hours while the ship altered course toward the Italian coastline. I keep thinking about Amelia sitting in that treatment room watching them work on him, knowing she had asked him to go days earlier. I don't know how you carry that. During the delay, the infection spread rapidly through his abdominal cavity. Septic shock developed while medical staff continued stabilization efforts inside the treatment center. The hours between the initial rupture and any surgical intervention had already allowed the infection to advance well beyond what onboard treatment could control. Shortly before sunrise, the weather improved enough for helicopter evacuation. Louis was flown to a hospital in southern Italy, where emergency surgery was performed on arrival. He died later that afternoon despite surgical intervention and intensive care treatment. The medical examiner recorded his cause of death as septic shock, resulting from a ruptured appendix and widespread abdominal infection, compounded significantly by the delay in surgical treatment during the overnight weather hold. Amelia remained in Italy to handle medical, legal, and transportation arrangements. The ship continued its scheduled route. Louis had spent nearly a year planning every detail of that trip and refused a doctor's visit for 5 days because he was certain it was nothing serious.